afternoon, good evening to all of our viewers. Thank you so much for joining us for another installment of Inclusive Perspectives from the Baseline, where we highlight the experiences of traditionally underrepresented and marginalized members of our Texas tennis community. I am excited to be joined by three panelists today as we talk about life as the only, and really allowing our audience to learn about the experience of people who, in many instances, if not most of their time in our sport, have been in spaces where they were the only person who looked like them. And so what is that like? And so our hope is that through this conversation, we can create more empathy. We can create more open-mindedness as it relates to having an inclusive mindset towards those who don't have our same lived experience. And so I'll do a quick introduction of our panelists, and then we will get right into some questions. We do thank you again for joining us. And I will start first with our Dr. Cherise Smith. We're excited to have Dr. Smith. She is the chair of African American Studies in the Department of African and Diaspora Studies at the University of Texas. She is an author. She is an artist. She's also a faculty member at UT and a very passionate tennis player in her own right. So look forward to hearing more from Dr. Cherise Smith about her experience in our sport. Secondly, on your screen, you'll see Charles Turic, but we affectionately all know him as Carlos Turic. He has been involved in our sport for decades, going all the way back to 1986. He has a long history and is very well known in the Dallas community with his role not only representing the Dallas Tennis Association, but certainly in his role having been the president for 20 years now to the Dallas Wheelchair Tennis Club. We all affectionately know him for everything that he's done as it relates to the many committees that he's been a part of here for the section. He has been a player for the sport. He's been a volunteer and certainly a leader as it relates to wheelchair tennis, not only here in our state, but nationally. So thank you very much, Carlos, for joining us. And last but certainly not least, Suds Sitaram. Recently named as a volunteer assistant at UT, where he was a former student athlete. He's also the director of performance for the Polo Tennis Club here in Austin. Director of high performance. I'm sorry, Suds, I want to make sure I get that exactly right. And is the 2021 CATA Junior Team Coach of the Year, Junior Coach of the Year. So Suds, happy to have you as well. And to all three of you, my hope, and I know it's important for you that we continue to allow people to understand what it's like being in a space where you are the only person who looks like you. You're walking into spaces where you know that there might be extra eyes on you, or people might already have formed opinions about who you are based on the skin that you are in and the way that you present yourself. And so we'll just start out. I'll start with you, Dr. Smith. If you can just talk us through your experience playing tennis. Obviously, you've been doing it for a while, going all the way back to 2005, but I know our audience would appreciate just hearing about your experience in other sports and how you ended up coming to tennis.
Thank you, Erica. It's a pleasure to be here to talk with you today about my tennis experience. So I would say that I have almost always, though not always, but quite often been the only person like me in situations. I am a mixed race Black woman from Los Angeles, and even then in the 1970s, there weren't very many of us that I encountered. And so I was often, if not always, the one Black child in her class. And then when I started playing volleyball, I was the only Black person on my team then. Then when I started studying art history, which is what I've dedicated my life to, I was the only Black person in my art history classes. And that has just continued on through to my tennis life. And as you said, I started playing tennis in about 2005. I transitioned from volleyball, which can be a social sport, but oftentimes is really hard to play if you don't have at least 4 people to play. I was looking for a sport, then I was 35, that was social, that I could do well into my older years, because I'd seen older people playing. And so it was a sport that I thought transitioned well from the kind of short sprinting bursts of energy forward and backward and lateral movements that I had in volleyball that just kind of perfectly translated into tennis. It is a sport that I love. It is a frustrating sport. It's a sport I wish that I had picked up as a young person, but I think I'm gaining traction on getting better. I mean, it is a sport that remains pretty exclusively white, and it can even be upper class. I have been a team captain in my experience in tennis, but I've also always been the only Black person on teams on which I've played here in Austin. Um, yeah, maybe I should stop there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smith. Carlos, tell us about your journey, my friend.
Well, from a sports perspective, I've I've always been an athlete. It was important for me, like most kids, to belong, and so sports in public schools is usually the easiest place for that to happen. And so that's how I got my start as an athlete. Before my injury that left me a paraplegic, I was mostly known for baseball and football. Did lots of other stuff because that's what your friends do. So that's what you do. But I primarily focus on baseball and football and pursued football from a college perspective. And so was lucky enough to have those experiences, to be recruited by top college football programs and stuff, and to experience a year of that. But then had my accident, which was a motorcycle accident involving a drunk driver, and who had nothing, poor as a church mouse in Arkansas. And so I started a new kind of life at that point in 1986 at 19 years old. And fortunately, Arkansas is one of those, the only state in the country that has a program, state program geared toward helping people with spinal cord injuries. And it's called the Arkansas Spinal Cord Commission. So they immediately assigned me, they called them peer counselors, a peer family. So I was immediately immersed, whether I wanted to be or not, in this new world I was in. And those guys, my peers, they wanted to start a wheelchair basketball team. So I'm hurt in July. In November, I'm helping to start a basketball program before I'm even eligible or healthy enough to play and that kind of thing. And so I started out with adaptive sports immediately. I hated basketball. I was not very good at it. I wasn't good at it when I could walk. It did not satisfy my need to hit people, which I know is this day and age, 35 years later, is not acceptable. But, football is a violent sport and involves collisions, and basketball didn't have that as much. But it was available in eastern Oklahoma, western Arkansas. So that's what I did, because being a part of sport was the most important thing. Blessed career, started at the local team, recruited to play with one of the very top teams in the country at the time, the Arkansas Rolling Razorbacks. Was blessed when I transferred to work on the rest of my undergraduate degree. They recruited me. I played for them, was given some scholarship opportunity, 2 national wheelchair basketball championships, transferred to Texas to go to graduate school at Texas Women's University. Thought I was retiring from basketball, got suckered into playing 2 more years. At the end of the second year, one of the players said, "Hey, you should come out and play tennis." And I just laughed at him. I'm like, "Dude, what are you talking about?" He's a great player, former world #1. I didn't know any of that at the time. Best of friends now. But he suckered me in, and I went on Tuesday night, and I've never stopped. So I love tennis, even though it's not a big contact sport for the most part. And I say most part with sense of humor, but if you've played me, you know there's some contact involved. But it did feel these competitive needs that I had in a way that other disability sports had not. Um, Dallas, great wheelchair tennis program, good community, lots of opportunity for me, but still very often the only guy in a wheelchair when I wanted to get away from just the wheelchair tennis community. When I wanted to expand my opportunity to be involved within the tennis community, I was always the only one. You go to a club to play leagues, I'm the only guy in a wheelchair. You go to a tournament that's not a wheelchair specific tournament, only guy in a wheelchair. So, and then in my undergrad in college, what was really unique was because I was so active and involved on my campus, I would always get this, hey, why don't you play intramural basketball with us? Why don't you play this or play that? And in that situation, definitely the only guy in a wheelchair. And I think those experiences, when I finally experienced tennis, what made it awesome for me is I could be the only guy in a wheelchair. When I played intramural basketball in college, I got 9 able-bodied players on the court, and you're trying to come up with special rules, and you're trying to not run somebody over and break their kneecaps. But when I played tennis, of all the wheelchair sports, tennis is one of the only ones. There are a couple other things starting to evolve, but I don't like to talk about pickleball. But it's the only sport that I can do with anybody. I've had a blessed career as a player, as a teaching professional. I've had students from 4 to 84, disabled, not disabled, and I can just go hit. Players that are just beginners, or I've had the luxury of hitting with, I can name drop Andre Agassi, Andy Roddick, Taylor Dent. I've been on the court with those guys, and we can rally and we can have fun. You don't get to do that with anything but tennis, especially from my perspective as a wheelchair athlete. So that's kind of my background and how I got here.
Thank you. Well, thanks to that teammate who encouraged you to come out for wheelchair tennis. Who knows where USTA Texas would be without your involvement and your leadership and your commitment to the sport, specifically as it relates to the Dallas area. So whoever that teammate is, thank you so much for making that invite. So Suds, transferring over to you now, kind of tell us your journey. Why tennis in the very early ages of life, and your transition into now being a volunteer assistant there at UT.
Sure. So I started playing tennis at the age of 7. My parents put me in, for no reason, just for fun, as a source of exercise or so. Started competing, playing tournaments when I was 10. Absolutely loved it. Started working really hard, found tennis as a passion. And when I was about 14 years old, I became one of the best players in my country, in India. So the Indian Federation picked 4 boys and 4 girls, and they put us in an academy in a different city. And one thing I was really fortunate for is they sponsored us, and they paid for all our travel and all our training as well. So I got the opportunity to play all around the world, play all the junior Grand Slams, and had a junior ranking of about top 40 in the world in the ITF juniors. And I got recruited to play at by a bunch of big colleges, and I picked the University of Texas to go play tennis for. So at the University of Texas, played for them from the years of 2010 to 2014. Ended up being the captain of the team my senior year. And once I graduated, I still really had a huge passion for the sport, loved it, and I really wanted to, give back and teach, as far as what I had learned, as far as my experiences and stuff like that. So I decided to become a tennis coach here at the Polo Club in Austin, and started off as just one of the coaches, was promoted to assistant director, and then eventually to director in 2017. And I run the high performance program over here at the Polo Club. And one thing, as far as being the only in my sport, coming from India, where in a culture where education has always been the number one priority, right? So if you're not an engineer or a doctor, it's not really good enough. So when I was going through this journey, at a young age, when I was spending hours on the tennis court, spending not as much time in school, like most of my family and my friends, everyone except my parents, they were not for it. They thought we were completely crazy, and they were like, what are you doing? So there was actually quite a lot of pressure with all those eyes on me, kind of expecting me to fail, not really going for it. And that was something which I had to deal with. But I was extremely fortunate and grateful for my parents, who kept giving me the support, who allowed me to go follow my passion. And I couldn't be more thankful for that. So tennis is still my passion. I absolutely love the sport, and looking forward to learning more from you guys.
Thanks, Suds. If there's a way for you to raise your camera up just a little bit, we're seeing like just above your eyes. That's perfect. Thank you. Thank you for that. So I'll come back to you, Dr. Smith, real quick. So you all, thank you for sharing your journeys and specifically as it relates to tennis. So Dr. Smith, you mentioned that you came to tennis because of the social aspects of it. I think what binds all of us in terms of tennis and continuing to come back to it is just a love for the sport. So you mentioned the social side of it. What else is it about tennis that you love that keeps you coming back to it, with being a mom and having a huge job with many layers to it? What is it that you love about tennis? I think for our audience, that will really allow us, as we all, present differently, to really be grounded in what we share with regard to our love for the sport.
Yeah, so the social aspect is really only one component of it. It's true. I think there are a whole bunch of things I love about tennis. I love that being in a pretty fair weather state, that I can play year round. I especially love playing in Texas in the winter when it's when it's relatively cool. I like that I get my vitamin D this way. I like its similarities to the sport that I came from, which is volleyball. I have to say that even though I'm frustrated by not having been trained to do it as a junior, I also really appreciate that I am learning. I am continually learning how to play this game, that I maybe I have a nice ground stroke now, but I still don't have the same court sense that I do in volleyball, for example, or that someone who played as a junior through their life does. So there's an aspect of humility that I have to have, a posture of humility that I have to have in playing tennis. In being a novice, and I won't say that I'm a novice, but I'm still a novice in some respects. So I like that I am not really good at it, and that I have to keep trying to improve myself in this sport. I love to be at the net. I love volleying. I love to play a kind of athletic. I love an athletic game, and so it is always challenging me in a positive and good way, and sometimes a frustrating way.
Very much. It keeps you humble, doesn't it?
It does.
Humble. So Suds and Carlos, having played at the elite level of the sport and competing at a level that puts you against some of the greats, not only in your country, but even around the world. What is it that allowed you to get to the level that you were when you were in spaces where, as you mentioned, Carlos and Suds, you've even hit on a little bit, that you were in spaces where there was pressure on you, there weren't people who looked like you. What is it that it took for you to achieve the level of successes that you were? And whoever wants to start with that question.
Well, I think if you're, for me, it was, I'm an athlete first. It isn't, I listened to Cherise talk about, she kept describing how she loved this, she loved that, about tennis. And I personally find that when I talk with people and I advocate for tennis, that you can switch tennis for any sport, golf, pickleball, badminton, I don't care. The part that really draws you to it is there's some kind of a chemistry between you and that particular sport. And I don't know that I've ever found anyone who can describe that chemistry without just simply using a word like love. So for me, just to enjoy the sport, and tennis did that. It was about these other desires I had inside, to be competitive, to be the best at something, to enjoy the struggle and the challenge of improving your skill set, and the social part of it and stuff. And so for me, as a person who came from playing professional wheelchair sports, college able-bodied sports and professional wheelchair sports, those were the things that drove me and allowed me those opportunities. I already had that. Just for whatever reason, I chose tennis as the vehicle to drive, to fill those. I do personally believe tennis is the greatest sport on the planet, second only to football. I don't get to play football like I used to. We now play wheelchair football, but there are rules about how hard you can bang into one another and all. I don't even enjoy it. It's a waste of my time. But tennis fills all those things that I talked about earlier, those desires and those that competitive juices kind of thing. And so those are the things that I think drive you when you want to play at a much higher level. Although Cherise is not, trying to be a professional athlete, she's trying to be the best athlete she can be at the level she's playing at. And that's no different than trying to be, Roger Federer. You're trying to be the best at the very level that you're introduced to. And I try and drill that into my students. Not all of my students are going to be professional wheelchair tennis players, but I do want them to be the best they can be at the level they choose to play at. And so that's the juice for me.
Thank you. Suds?
I think for me, what drove me towards sport is the competitive aspect of it. But especially tennis, it's a little different from most other sports because it's an individual sport, right? You're out on court by yourself. You're figuring things out on your own. There's no one there to help you. Just learning to deal with that type of adversity when you're competing on your own is what really drove me towards tennis. And that drove me to be the best player I can be, spending hours on the court and figuring things out on your own. That really motivated me. And now being a coach, going through the same journey with some of the kids I coach, watching them grow, watching them learn to deal with adversity on the tennis court and being a part of their tennis journey is what really drives me.
Thank you for that. So I think with all three of your remarks, we hit on some commonalities that any tennis player can really relate to. And so that was really important for me as we transition to your experiences traveling to an event, Suds, coming to a meeting or a competition, Carlos, showing up for a match, Cherise, or really volleyball and then tennis, Cherise, as it relates to stepping into a space where you are the only person who looks like you. So I'm going to jump to you, Carlos, really quickly. So you mentioned that there have been opportunities for you to play against able-bodied tennis players. However, there was a road as you look back, 1986 and having spent all these decades in the sport, a lot of times where you were the only person coming to a match or coming to play tennis who looked like you. So talk our audience through, many of which who are able-bodied, who haven't had your lived experiences, what that is like, what that feels like, so they can really have a better understanding and appreciation for the life of wheelchair tennis player.
Yeah. For the tennis now, it's kind of important to know that although I was injured in 86 and I started my wheelchair athlete journey there, I wasn't introduced to wheelchair tennis until late 1998. And so that was when I remind people that when I was originally injured, there was no ADA or any laws in place that helped protect people with disabilities for access and things like that. So the mentality was different then too. By the time I was introduced to tennis in the late 90s, you know, the ADA had been around for a few years. There had been public press. There started to be some of that, for lack of a better term, social justice kind of thing toward people with disabilities. And so there was some openness in coming to courts and coming to Dallas. You know, a lot of clubs around the community, they knew the wheelchair tennis club existed. All the tennis was played out of LB Houston back then, for the most part. And so, but other clubs, a lot of the pros knew, you know, like, oh yeah, that's that group of handicapped people and stuff. But when I decided to get serious about tennis, you know, the wheelchair tennis club practiced twice a week. I wanted to play every day. And so I started to get involved with tennis clubs. And I remember specifically, I had a coach volunteer, a guy, Coach Louie, volunteer. He says, you know, I'd love to teach you some tennis out of South Lake Tennis Center. He says, how about if I coach you and you work for me in the juniors program? And these are all able-bodied kids, you know. And so here I am showing up to clinics and stuff. I'm the only guy in a wheelchair. And whoever the feeding pro would be during that clinic, you know, they don't know. And a great leader of ours, Randy Snow, some people will recognize that name, but really the godfather of wheelchair tennis in Texas and the godfather of tennis worldwide, really. Randy used to tell us, we would end every camp, everything we do, and Randy's no longer with us, so the audience knows, those that don't know us, but he always ended with one thing: tennis is tennis is tennis. And so when I show up, I tell new pros, tennis is tennis. If you can be a good tennis coach, and the number one skill you have to have as a tennis coach is error detection and correction, then you can teach wheelchair tennis. If you're not any good at that, you probably can't be a good coach anyway, is kind of the bluntness for me. So focus on that. Just focus on, sometimes the coach is making the error, not feeding to a wheelchair player properly. Well, it's not that that player can't hit a forehand, it's that that feed isn't coming that way. So when I'm the only one there, I have to spend all this energy trying to educate able-bodied people. And I don't like labels, but for the purpose of this, you know, that's your adversary sometimes, is the gap between they're scared of me. You know, they're like, I don't know what to do. They don't look like me. And everybody on this call can relate to that in some way or another. And so having to combat that is always a challenge. You know, helping them understand that I'm just a tennis player. Let's do that. And then the other unique part of it is you show up for a league, like an in-house club league. And they always have their own rules, right? And I asked the pro or the coordinator, you know, hey, did you tell them I get 2 bounces? Oh, no, I figured I'd let you do that. Oh, that's great. Make me the bad guy. So, you know, I got 3 guys on a court, or, you know, if it's doubles or if it's singles, I always enjoy singles first. And I remind them, I go, hey, have you ever played against a wheelchair player? No. Oh, well, you know the only rule difference, right? No. Well, I get 2 bounces. Oh, okay. And then we get out there to play, and they hit a ball that normally is a winner for them. And I'm tracking it down on the second bounce and hit it in play, and they're standing there just watching it go by. And they get really upset. I have had players quit matches because I'm winning and I get 2 bounces. And there are a few of those players that I've been stubborn enough to go, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll take 1 bounce and we play $1 a point. And they regret that more. You know, and but it is a struggle. I think my experience is different in that than like Cherise and Suds, in that nobody probably questions their ability to be a tennis player. I would assume that with those guys, you know, it's usually, do you belong here because of what color you are, or your ethnicity, or, you know, the cultural part of it. With me, they immediately look, they don't, I mean, I'm a white guy, right? So they immediately look at me and their first thing is, what's a guy in a wheelchair doing here? He can't play tennis. You know, so they challenge my physical ability to participate in their sport. And so that's where I have a whole lot of fun when I know I'm going to win that one. You know, and I'm bad about that. I'll admit that. So that experience is a little bit unique, I think, from the other panelists that we have. But I can relate to, you know, you're just different than everybody else that's there. So does that kind of answer your question, Erica?
That definitely does, Carlos. Thank you very much. So I found it really important your mention of the fact that there's an education that's involved when you're setting into a new environment, whereas they don't know the rule. There are 2 bounces, and then, you know, what you mentioned as it relates to being challenged by people thinking you're not physically able to be able to play the sport. So really powerful that comparison you made between, you know, Cherise and Suds maybe having people discriminate or prejudge them based on the color of their skin. You may be prejudged based on the fact that people don't think you may be physically able to compete, dare I say even beat them. So I appreciate those explanations that you shared. Suds, the floor is yours now. Obviously, coming from playing in India, you know, everybody looks the same. You don't have to worry about that being part of anything that you need to be challenged with as it relates to any discrimination or prejudice. However, you traveled around the world. You mentioned that you played in the Grand Slams as a junior, all 4 of them, and certainly have traveled extensively with regard to being an elite player in India. So what was that experience like for you, being the only as you traveled throughout the world?
Yeah, I know. I think like I mentioned a little bit before, right? You know, where the Indian culture is, where education has always been the number 1 priority. You know, kids play tennis, but eventually when you get to, you know, junior or senior in high school, okay, you focus on academics. You know, you leave away everything else and you focus on academics. So as far as my journey, the fact that I was given the opportunity to follow my passion, it's kind of like the only, you know, especially now where I've been able to follow my passion even after college and be a tennis coach, even over here right now when I see some Indian people over here. So they're like, okay, what do you do for a living? And I say, I'm a tennis coach. I teach tennis. Okay, what else? What do you actually do? You know, it's not accepted, or it's not kind of viewed as a profession where, you know, you can actually make a living and you can actually teach, and it's not looked upon as that way. So just going through those challenges and facing that on a daily basis is kind of what I see. It is an education turn for Indian people, where okay, you can have tennis as your passion and you can do something with your life, not just through academics, being a doctor or an engineer. Tennis is a great way to meet people, and it's a great thing as a way of life as well.
Absolutely. I love what you had to say as it relates to just stepping outside of just you as a player, but then even as it relates to your career off the court. And so still having, if I could use Carlos's word, just the education of people knowing that this can be a career, something that you can take off the court as a career as well. Cherise, going back to being a volleyball player and a tennis player, and the many platforms you mentioned where you were the only. So share with our audience a little bit about what that's like. Let's specifically talk about tennis. When you tell friends or you're talking to folks about tennis being something that you're involved in, like what is their reaction? Any surprise that a Black woman is playing tennis? Like, what is it like for you when you come out for matches? As you said many times, if not all the time, you are the only. Share with our audience about what that experience looks like and feels like for you.
I think I might like to kind of change the thing that you're asking and to tell you about going on to a court and encountering other Black people. And so what I will tell you is that last year I was not in Austin, I was in Los Angeles, and there's a thriving community of Black tennis players in Los Angeles, and not just Black tennis players, but people of other races and ethnicities. I happened to be playing at some public courts there, where I took lessons with pros and did clinics. And my, I think, second clinic that I took in Pacific Palisades, there was a coach who was a young Black woman who had been a D1 player and who happened to have been also East African and French. And for the two of us to see another brown person on the court was just really a fun thing. I was happy to see a coach who was also of African descent, and she was happy to see another brown person on the court. And even though we didn't know each other, we went over to each other and we said, "Hi, so glad to see you here. This is great." And then we continued on. And then I will tell you that there was another day at the same tennis courts at another Sunday clinic. She was coaching, and I encountered another Black person in the clinic. So of the maybe 8 of us on the court, 3 of us were African American. And it was just a fun day to have encountered more people of color on the courts. And so one of the things that I took from my time in Los Angeles is that it's really kind of maybe area specific or geographically specific on how many non-white people also play the sport. And so I think in larger cities that are larger than Austin, there are probably many, many, many more diverse people playing than I happen to encounter in my life here in Austin. But it also made me want to have a more diverse tennis experience here in Austin. And it has, frankly, been a little challenging to try to recreate. But it's something that I continue to aspire to. And one thing that I will say is that there's also, in addition to the kind of ethno-racial difference that one encounters in tennis, there's also differences of income and of economics that one encounters. And, I think one thing that I also feel when I, go to play in a league on a Thursday morning, for example, I'm aware as a working woman, as a chair of a department, as a professor at a fantastic Research One university, that I have specifically set aside this morning in order to play this game that I am trying to get better at, that I'm exercising my competitiveness in this moment, that I've really literally had to carve this into my day, to prioritize it, to have it there. And that when I go, I am oftentimes one of few professional women in the environment. Many more women that I encounter are not working professionals. And so that is an interesting thing that I encounter in tennis as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's that privilege. We talk about privilege has many different facets to it, and the financial privilege to be able to set aside that time, whereas there are people who would love to be playing tennis at 10 or 11 a.m. on a weekday, but don't have that opportunity. So absolutely, it's an intersection of the different parts of your identity that go well beyond just the color of your skin. So I appreciate you taking another approach to my question, I can relate to what you were sharing as it relates to just that sense of community you feel when you see someone in a majority space who shares that same, even racial identity with you, or abled or disabled identity as it relates to part of your, not only Carlos, part of your identity, just that unspoken sense of familiarity. My first experience with USTA tennis came from playing league tennis when I lived in Columbia, South Carolina. And I happened to go to a park where the majority of the players were Black. And it was stunning for me to go into see 6 courts of all Black people playing tennis. And so I couldn't have smiled any bigger, just feeling that sense of oneness, that sense of belonging. One of you mentioned the word belonging, and I find that to be really, really important. We'll end with just one question that has to do with what the sport of tennis can do better to grow the sport amongst wheelchair players, to grow the sport amongst Indian American players, amongst people of color in general. We know that Suds, as it relates to Indian American junior players, we have a growing number of them, and that's been great for our sport. However, there's room for growth amongst all of those historically excluded groups in tennis. And so to the decision makers, to the people who have a platform to inspire change here in our state, what is it that we can do to help grow the sport amongst some of the populations that I just mentioned? And I'll open the floor up to anyone who wants to start out with answering.
Well, I guess I get to go first again, Erica. Lucky for us, I'm not bashful. Having served the section in many different ways, I think one of my biggest experiences that kind of helped me answer this question, because I get asked this question all the time, and not just for tennis. Everybody wants to ask this question, no matter what group they're in right now. And I typically go, well, it's really kind of a worthless question because you're putting somebody on the spot to say, they want to know, tell me what to go do for you. And that's not really how our different societies get better. To solve these problems, it's first about our approach and our attitude to recognizing that there is an issue, and then to set out to find ways to solve it, and to being open-minded to the many different ways it can be. So often as people, we just want the easiest path. Someone tell me what to do, and then we can go do that, and everything will be better for you, and it'll be better for me, and I did my job. And so serving on the strategic planning committee for many years under Jim Champin, which some people will probably recognize his name, one of the valuable lessons I learned was that we may not have all the answers, but we recognize the problem. And one of the big ones in Texas while we were there was, and continues to be, is our growing Hispanic community. And, pretty soon, all other races are going to be outnumbered by the Hispanic community, but they're not represented that way in tennis. So what do? And we never solved the problem, but we continuously kept it in front of our leaders. And we kept asking them, reminding them, this is a problem. We need to keep brainstorming. And I think the most important thing is to be open-minded, to know that when you hear something, you can't have the preconceived idea that, well, we tried that once, it didn't work. Well, it didn't work then. Maybe we need to tweak it, make it work this time. So continuing to be open to these different groups that are not the largest percentage of our tennis community today, but how we can help them grow. And so for that, it doesn't matter whether you're gay or lesbian or Black or white or disabled or whatever the deal is. Just continuing to be open and inclusive, when players come, inviting people. Sometimes I'll run into somebody in the grocery store. The other night in a hotel in Vicksburg, Mississippi, on Saturday night, a guy in a wheelchair passed me in a bunch of camouflage clothes. Before it was over with, I'm inviting him to learn more about wheelchair tennis, to learn about competitive bass fishing. You can't be scared. You just got to talk about what you love. And if you do that, you will share it with a passion that will find that chemistry for somebody else to want to try our sport. And then our community starts to solve these problems with how do we get more and more involved. So being open, being recognized, it is very frustrating to me when, I serve on the board of directors for the Dallas Tennis Association. And we'll be in meetings or I'll hear things and they'll go, oh, well, the Wheelchair Tennis Club does that for people with disabilities. Well, why do they say that? They say that because a group exists and the bridge, and this is sometimes my fault, the bridge is not the best between the Wheelchair Tennis Club or the adapted community and the able-bodied community, as an example, with the Dallas Tennis Association. So it's our jobs to understand that we all have to share the love of our sport. Know your resources, because a lot of communities, you go to Beaumont, Texas, there's no wheelchair tennis club. The pressure is on the Beaumont Tennis Association to grow wheelchair tennis or adapted tennis within their community. They represent the United States Tennis Association and our sport there. That's their job. Wheelchair tennis is a product line of the USTA, just like leagues or tournaments. So being open to knowing that and then listening. Does that help?
That's great.
Maybe.
Yes. So
It's kind of aggressive.
Well, I think it's realistic for us. I think to just be open-minded and be more inclusive. And that was what I hoped our audience would get from this conversation. So Suds, Cherise, what can you add as it relates to what we can do to help grow our sport, do more of, do less of, in order to see more people of diverse racial and other backgrounds represented?
I can go. I think Carlos brings up a great point about being open-minded. As far as for me, being an Indian, I think raising awareness to our Indian community, where we educate them on success stories and tell them about people who have gone through this process and who have become successful, through tennis, and as far as tennis being their passion. So to let them know that choosing tennis as a path is okay. You don't have to just go through the academic path. And if your kids want to play tennis, that's okay. Go ahead, let them choose that as a path, and they're going to be successful in any way they want to be. And tennis is a great sport for them to learn to deal with adversity and become tougher as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think just people who play should be open-minded and continue to invite people out. I mean, I do it with my own family. I do it with my friends. I'm trying to get my sons to play tennis. They are baseball athletes. At any rate, I think it is both being welcoming to new players and new people, regardless of what their background and identities are. And to keep inviting people out. And I guess I would also say that I want to put in a plug for my friend Jessica McMillan here, that I think I took a 9-year hiatus from tennis, and every time I saw her, she invited me to come back to the court. And I want to thank her for getting me back out onto the court. But it also takes that, just inviting the people who used to play and who could come back out.
So you're saying everyone needs a Jessica McMillan? Is that yes? For those
Erica,
of you, oh, sorry, Carlos. After
that's
you.
okay. I was just going to say, a good example that I share for the wheelchair community or the disabled community with the USTA and stuff, and with facility managers and those types of things is, part of being ready to invite wheelchair players out, for example, is to look at accessibility and not to assume that simply because, every country club I go to around here, none of them have a wheelchair accessible bathroom. I go to many places that I can't even go to the bathroom when I play there. But it doesn't mean that I don't take the opportunity to go and play and share my story and let them experience it they can, because what it may do is help that club understand, well, we need to fix a bathroom. Carlos needs to be able to go to the bathroom when he comes, kind of thing. And so, uh, you know, not being afraid, not always assuming that, oh, we don't have a bathroom, so let's not invite Carlos. Maybe what you should do is go to Carlos and say, hey, dude, we'd like to have you out for this mixer, and we're trying to recruit new members. I know we don't have an accessible bathroom. How can we help accommodate you that day? Because we really want you to come out. We don't want to exclude you, and it'd be a great opportunity. So I teach everybody everywhere. Just because I'm in a wheelchair doesn't mean I need you to carry my bag or to push my wheelchair. The number one thing you can do is simply ask, how can I help you today to make it better for you? I've been doing this 37 years. I've got a system down, right? And so if you step in and just start trying to force your preconceived ideas of what I need, then you're just going to mess it up and make it more difficult for me. And now I'm not enjoying this experience. But if I ask, hey, dude, can you help me out? Then be eager to help. And so that's just a good lesson that I teach pros and facility people and stuff, that you don't want to scare them off. You just be inviting.
Absolutely. That is the perfect way to end this conversation, Carlos. Thank you for that. So over the course of our time together, certainly we've talked about just being more aware, asking the questions, inviting people to come out and play. And so just thinking with a more inclusive mindset, and hopefully our audience got that based on everything that you all shared. So thank you very much, Dr. Cherise Smith, Carlos Turic, Sitaram, for your time today. You could be a lot of different places, but again, you were a part of this really important discussion, discussing life as the only. And so what your lived experiences, what your life experiences have been in the sport. And I hope that our audience is better for having heard from you specifically. So to everyone who joined us, again, thank you so much for your time and for being a part of another Inclusive Perspectives from the Baseline conversation. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.